one of the things we were talking about when you came in is a retreat I recently hosted in the woods. And part of the idea was to get people out of their regular environments and make connections surrounded by nature and in this much more abundant feeling kind of way. And I was thinking about, the slow food movements, the slow travel movements. But when we think about digital tools and technology, we think of it as moving fast, creating change fast, and that's all really good. But I'm curious, what would a slow digital tech company look like? One that prioritizes long term impact, patient trust, and equity over the long term. So bring us into this slow tech company. How would it approach the work in a different way than we've seen in the past?
I do think some companies are doing this. They may not be calling it that, but I think there's a tension with the speed and scale that venture requires. And when you look at health tech, that's often the dollars we're applying to these innovations. And so I think the first thing I would start with is like fundamentally changing the funding model for innovation in healthcare and really massively widening the aperture about how we think about that, and that every company could have a set of blended finance supporting whatever it is they're building in a way that, support resources those companies for what they need in that moment and as they grow. And I would imagine venture would be a part of that journey, but not the whole part of the funding pie. And I think that shift in funding would really change some of the markers and the metrics so that you could be a quote unquote slow tech company like the slow food movement and others. So that would be like the first thing I would say. What would you then do with different dollars? So I think you would really ground these innovations in community and trust. So less about transaction, less about users, and more about community, more about trust. That would be the first thing that I think would be different, which would then bleed into design. How things get designed wouldn't be, sure, rapid prototyping is really, often the gold standard. Well, sometimes the rapid prototyping misses what you learn from a community and the inputs needed to like get off on the right foot. And so I would think of the design behind these innovations as far more participatory and not as top down. So trust, not transactional. Design is participatory. And then I would measure, we talk a lot about adoption of these things. I would more meaningfully measure the adoption as not just downloads or signups, but rather like, is someone's health actually getting better? How are they engaging? What does engagement look like? How do we make that and measure that in a more meaningful way? And in terms of equity, I would put that right into the business model in ways that not all companies can afford to do. It can be expensive to have equity in the model. And then I would just have learning built into the operating model, like a constant culture of learning to make these products and models and delivery mechanisms as excellent as possible. So I think like these would be some of the markers and the principles of a slow tech company. We often celebrate in our space like how much a company has raised. And I would love for us to celebrate, how many lives saved or how, lives made better, et cetera, which I think ultimately could come out of the kind of movement you're talking about.